Okay, I'll now take decision by roll call. The following councillors are present. Councillors Alec Allison, John Anderson, John Bradley, Arch Buchanan. We have apologies from Councillor Margaret Cowie. Councillor Jerry Convery, are you present?
Yes, Stuart.
Okay. Councillor Peter Craig.
Present.
Councillor Maureen Devlin.
Present, Stuart.
With apologies from Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Dorman's present. We also have apologies from Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Lindsay Hamilton is present. We have apologies from Councillor Ian Harrow. Councillor Mark Corsham is present. Councillor LeBlond.
Present.
Okay. Councillor Martin Lennon.
Present.
Following councillors are also present. Councillor Richard Lockhart, Councillor Joe Lowe, Councillor Ian McCallan, Councillor David McLaughlin, Councillor Lynn Naylan, Councillor Carol Nugent.
Here.
Okay. Councillor John Ross. Councillors Graham Scott, David Shearer and Councillor Bert Thompson are present. Councillor Jim Murtaugh. I've also noted the officers who are present and understand that a member of the press is present for today's proceedings. Thank you. I'll now pass you back to the chair for today's business.
Thank you, Stuart. Agenda item 1, do we have any declarations of interest? No. Agenda item 2, the minutes of previous meeting in pages 5 to 14. Can we agree the minutes?
Agreed, Chair. Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, that's application P191890, and that's in pages 15 to 32, and Tina will take us through that item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. Just at the outset, just to say, Stuart, that Bernard is trying to get on, but his Teams had failed. But I can't see whether he's on or not, but he's trying to get back in just to check before his item.
I've just tried to call him into the meeting. Thanks, Tina.
Okay, thanks. Apologies. This is a detailed planning application by Abbey Construction for a site at Overton Avenue in Straven. The application site relates to a section of Straven Golf Course, and it's located along the southern boundary of the golf club. For several years, a large part of the site has been committed, is a committed site for residential development identified within the adopted local development plan, and comprises of some surplus land that the golf course has to the east of the golf club car park, where there are some equipment sheds as well. More recently, within the newly adopted SLDP2, the majority of the application site has become part of the urban area of Straven. There is a small western part of the site and a small section that falls within the green belt and is a sort of rounding off of the site. The site is currently unkempt and overgrown surplus land, and as I say, there are some old equipment sheds on it, some of which have been demolished in the western section, and some earth spoil from the golf course maintenance area over several years has been kept in that area. There's some mature trees and mixed conifers around the site and on the edge of the site. The applicants are seeking planning permission for a flatted development of 18 units, and that's three-story blocks, which would sit diagonally within the site, and there's also parking for 36 cars. The flats are orientated so that the rear of the flats overlook the golf course. Just turning to the policy background is set out in section 3 of the report, and as I say, the site is identified within the LDP. Turning to section 4, the responses from the consultees are set out there, and there are no objections from consultees subject to conditions. Representations, we did receive a number of representations at the outset in response to the advert and neighbour notification, and 28 letters in total were received. Thereafter, there was a significant design change, and we neighbour notified again, and a further 18 letters of representation were received, some of them from the same authors. The grounds of objection are summarised in 5.2 of the report. I won't go through all the points, but they're all set out there with our responses. Some of the main issues related to traffic and access issues and amenity issues. However, our own roads colleagues are happy with the arrangement. We have an access road that comes from all the way from Glasgow Road, and there will be a footpath on one side of the road. In terms of access and the parking arrangements, roads are fine with it. In terms of amenity, which was the other main issue of concern, there is residential development relatively close to the site, and it has changed to a contemporary design. We have, however, there is having been on site 2 or 3 times, looking at the boundary. The northwest and southeast elevations of the new development are some 37 metres away from the nearest houses in Golfview Estate. So there is a significant area distance, but also there's a buffer between, which isn't owned by the applicants, and that will remain, as far as I understand. There's a 20-metre depth of buffer, which is heavy screening and trees and shrubs and bushes. So the rest of the points are set out in section 5 of the report. Turning to our assessment and conclusions, it is a new flatted residential development within the grounds of the golf club. It's a site that's been identified, as I say, for a number of years, and we're happy that the design has been, it's a bespoke design to suit the location. Proposal was advertised as development contrary to the development plan because of the small section which does edge into the green belt. However, as I outlined in the report, the majority of the site falls within the urban area of Straven, and the small area that would be within the green belt is acceptable. It's mainly landscaped grounds and beyond to the open golf course. So we're happy to recommend approval subject to the conditions attached.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions or comments for Tina? Don't see any hands, so I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 4.
Chair, sorry, can I just say I've just had a discussion with Bernard Darragh. He's unable to access Teams at the moment, unfortunately. And what he has said is that he lives close to the office and he's able to very quickly go to the office. I don't know whether you want to perhaps change the order of the items to allow that to happen, or if another officer would speak on the items.
I'm quite happy to change them unless there's anyone else wants to speak on Bernard's behalf at the moment.
Okay, right.
Okay.
I'll just go back to Bernard then and ask him if he can make his way to the office as quickly as possible.
That'd be great. Thank you,
Sorry.
sir.
Oh.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come in? I think, yeah, if you could maybe put Bernard's items further down the agenda. If push comes to shove and Bernard can't make it in and we're ready for his items, I can take them, Chair, but as long as the members are gentle with me. But Bernard does live quite close, so hopefully he can come in and get sorted. But we've got a plan A and a plan B. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks,
Thank
Pauline. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 5, and that's application P201310, and that's on pages 45 to 60. And Tina will take us through the item. Thank you, Tina.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, it is a detailed planning application by South Vale Homes Lanark Limited, and it's the site of the former Lesmahago High School, the southern campus at Abbey Green in Lesmahago. The majority of the site has been left vacant following the demolition of the school in 2009, with the exception of the existing retained dwelling house at the front of the site, adjacent to existing vehicular access. The proposal is for the redevelopment of the vacant site and the erection of 19 dwelling houses, together with the associated access road, drainage works and landscaping. The existing dwelling house that I referred to is to be retained as part of the redevelopment as as is the existing substation. The proposed access would be retained from Abbey Green, with a new residential street formed to provide access to 15 of the dwellings, together with the parking spaces for the retained dwelling. The other 4 houses would be accessed directly from Abbey Green. 4 house types are proposed, but they are all bungalows and single story in height, and the applicants have targeted that type of house type for that location. In terms of policy set out in section 3, it is within the built up area, and it's no longer required by the school campus. In terms of consultations, the consultations are set out in section 4 of the report, and there are no objections from consultees, subject to some conditions. In terms of statutory neighbour notification, that was carried out and the proposal was advertised in the local press, and as a result we had 2 letters of comment and 1 letter of support, which the points are set out in section 5 of the report, and it's no strong objection, just really seeking clarification of the design and boundary details, etc. So that's set out in section 5. Turning to our assessment and conclusion, it's the proposal is for the redevelopment of a vacant site, which will see development within relatively close to the town centre, within the existing settlement boundary. So it fully complies with policy. With regards to the proposed design, the layout and the scale of the site, it's considered it would be appropriate given the overall size and shape. As I say, it's single-storey bungalows, and they'll be laid out within the shape of the site. The existing vehicular access would be used to form the new street provided access for the majority of the properties. Overall, the proposal is considered to be appropriate redevelopment of the vacant site, and we are supportive of that. Therefore, recommending that planning permission is granted subject to the attached conditions.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions or comments? Don't see any hands. I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6, and that's P201670, and that's on pages 61 to 80. And Tony Finn will take us through the item. Thank you, Tony.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The application site is located at Dovesdale Farm, which is 1.5 kilometres southeast of Stonehouse, 4 kilometres south of Larkhall, on the western side of Carlisle Road. The M74 is located around 750 metres to the east of the site, with Canaside Junction some 2 kilometres to the north. The application area is located adjacent to the applicant's existing business, and that includes a haulage business and also a waste transfer facility. The application site itself, it's a former quarry that extends to approximately 17 hectares. The majority of it, around about 14 hectares, is an existing active infilling operation using inert materials and in particular construction debris. And the site also contains recycling facilities. So planning permission for the infilling of the quarry was originally granted in 1994. An application which sought to renew and consolidate previous consents relating to this larger site was approved in 2011. So the application before you today involves 2 elements. Firstly, the applicant is seeking to amend condition 2 of the 2011 consent, which imposed a time limit of 10 years for the completion of the infilling and then the restoration of the site. That permission was granted on the 11th of May 2011, so therefore the consent has expired. Would say in mitigation, though, that the application was made in good time on the 24th of November 2020, but there's been a delay in getting this to committee because of the ability of SEPA to respond to consultation requests. That follows a cyber attack on their IT systems last year. In support of the application, the applicants have stated that input into the existing consented infill has averaged approximately 50,000 tonnes per year over a number of years. And that's much reduced compared to what they originally anticipated. And that's due to the increased recycling of materials that have been brought into the site. The second part of the proposal involves an extension to the existing infilling operations into another part of the former quarry. At the time of the first application, that part of the quarry was in third-party ownership, and so it wasn't included in the application of subsequent ones. The applicants have recently acquired that land that includes the remainder of the quarry, and therefore they're proposing to extend the infill into this area. So based on the current rate of infill in the existing quarry, they're seeking to complete the entire activity within a period of 36 years. The site will continue to operate on a phased basis. It'll be subject to progressive restoration to agricultural use, and the recycling facilities that are there at the present, they would continue. So in terms of consultations, Roads and Transportation have advised that there's no proposed increase in the number of daily trips, and therefore they're satisfied there won't be any impact on the road network. SEPA have also advised they've got no objections, and that's subject to the replication of all the previous conditions relating to noise and dust. SEPA have confirmed that the existing facility is regulated under the waste regulations. An application to vary this permit is yet to be submitted, but they're satisfied that what's proposed is potentially consentable. In terms of the detailed proposals, they've got no objections, but they've recommended the final slope be amended to bring the low scope excavation closer to the Loch Moor, and that's in a particular part of the site. And a condition requiring amended slope proposals for that forms part of the recommendation. Following the carry out of neighbour notification and advertisement of the application, 52 letters of objection were received, and the points raised are summarised in section 5 of the report. I'll just turn to some of them very briefly and respond to them. Firstly, the objects that advising and that the application site is within the green belt. That is correct. However, the proposals involve a continuation of an existing facility where the principle has already been established. Concerns are also raised about the impact on the road network and the increase in traffic. As I said previously, the proposals wouldn't result in an increase in the amount of daily movements to and from the site, and Roads are content that there will be no impact on the road network. The third ground for objection is the increase in noise, dust and odour. Environmental Services are content that the current noise and dust management regimes in place have been successful, and the application doesn't request any change in their management. In terms of watercourses and wildlife and biodiversity, and also the nearby Candlemoss SSSI. So in response to that, the site's not a known floodplain, and SEPA has not raised any objection in relation to flooding. There are no watercourses running through the site, although the Candle water does run adjacent to it. But as with the existing operations, it's proposed that the drainage of the site is directed to eastwards to ensure it's carried away from that watercourse. The application doesn't contain any ecological designations. An ecological appraisal was submitted as part of the application, and that notes that the site consists of the existing infilling operations in previously disturbed land, and therefore it's unlikely to be of great habitat value. The Candlemoss SSSI, it's approximately 750 metres to the east of the site. It's designated as a remnant of a formerly more extensive raised bog. So it's designated really for its geological rather than its wildlife criteria. And there's no direct connection between the hydrology of both sites. So we're satisfied that the proposals wouldn't have any detrimental impact on the SSSI. And it's also worth noting that Scottish Natural Heritage, as was, didn't object to any previous applications and have not objected to this one either. Finally, objectors contend that landfill should not be supported, but rather be reduced. But in response to that, we would say the application is not for municipal waste. It does require landfill, but it's for inert construction material that will be used as part of the infill of the quarry. So turning to the assessment, at a national level, the Scottish planning policy states that waste is a resource and an opportunity rather than a burden. And in line with Scotland's zero waste policy, this means wasting as little as possible. So the proposals here involve the continuation and the extension of the existing infill operation with inert construction material, but the recycling element does ensure that that's only after all usable construction waste has been sorted out and sent back to construction industry for reuse. So as a result, the proposal is in line with national planning policy. The majority of the site's already an existing infilling operation where the principle of the farming development has been established, going back to the 1990s. It's noted also that the site at that time was also in the green belt. The southerly extension of the infill now being proposed, it represents a logical extension of the existing activity, and it involves a fairly small increase in the area, and we're satisfied overall that the proposals wouldn't compromise the overall integrity of the green belt. The proposals include the sorting of inert waste, as I said, for reuse, and where it's not possible, it'll be used for infill. So the proposals don't increase flood risk, and there wouldn't be an adverse impact on the water and soil environment, air quality or biodiversity. And the application will eventually result in restoration to agricultural use, which in turn will result in environmental benefits. The site and the associated activity is not visually prominent from receptors or the surrounding area. There are no views from it from either the Carlisle Road or from the M74 motorway. The western slopes of the former quarry that look onto Stonehouse, they go on continual restoration, which includes a reprofile and greening. And the proposals also will continue to be carried out in agreed phases, which will minimise their visual impact. The existing consent includes requirements in relation to noise levels, and these will be maintained if permission is granted. The noise levels on the existing consents have been proven to be appropriate in ensuring that operations don't impact on the immunity of the wider area, and there's no change proposed to the hours of operation. So in conclusion, it's considered the continued use of the site as infilling to restore the former quarry in tandem with the ongoing recycling is acceptable. It complies with national or local plan policy. So the proposed extension area is considered to be acceptable as it ensures the full extent of the quarry would be restored. And it's also considered that the request for the time period of 36 years would allow the operation to continue at their current low impact levels, and therefore wouldn't bring any additional impact with the immunity of the area. So therefore, overall, it's recommended that permission be granted.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions or comments for Tony? I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Chair.
Thank you. Agree the report.
Chair. Sorry, Councillor Shearer's just raised his hand.
Sorry. Councillor Shearer?
Thanks, Chair. A wee bit of difficulty getting the machine to accept my request, but thank you. I've got one concern, which is the 36-year extension. Would it be more appropriate to extend it for, say, 10 years, which would allow a review of what's going on the site in 10 years' time, rather than just having it open-ended for 36 years? I do feel that that's a bit, it takes it out of any control whatsoever, and that's my main concern. Could Tony maybe answer that for me, please?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Shearer, and through you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the 36-year period has been proposed because it reflects the rate of infill that's been going on on average since the operation started in the mid-90s. We're not aware since then, it's been going for 25 years. We're not aware of any issues relating to noise and dust. It's a well-managed site, and we do monitor the site annually to make sure that the phasing is being carried out in accordance with the plan that's been approved, and also the restoration. So my feeling is the 36 years is appropriate. As I say, if it gives Councillor Shearer any comfort, we do monitor the site annually, and we do take up any issues with the operator, albeit we haven't had to do that at all, it's fair to say. So,
Chair, can I come back on that?
Yes, you can, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So, Tony, I'm assuming if it's monitored annually and there was any issues, would it be brought back before committee, or would it come to just be dealt with by officers?
Yeah, through you, Chair, yes, it would just be dealt with by officers. First of all, through negotiation and try and work with the operator to make things right if things have gone wrong. But if it came to it, we have enforcement powers to take action against the breach of any conditions or the breach of the way the site's been operated.
Is that okay? Councillor Shearer, you okay with that?
I'm not okay with it, but if the officers are telling me they've got control of the site, then I have to take their word for it. There's still a sinking feeling at the bottom of my stomach going, this would be better if it was on a shorter time scale where they have to come back to us and ask for a renewal again. But it would appear that I am the only one with any concerns. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other hands, Stuart?
Chair, yeah, Councillor McLaughlin's got his hand raised.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin?
Thanks, Chair. I'm tending to agree with Councillor Shearer. 36 years is a long time, and a lot of things that happen in between then, and between now and then, that we might have a different view on it. And I really don't see any downsides to reducing it to something like 10 years, because at the end of the day, the applicant would just come back in 10 years, and if everything was okay, we could grant it for another 10 years as a rolling thing. It's not really such a big deal just having to hear it at committee. I know they'd be a bit an expense for the applicant, but, in the scale of things, I don't think it would be that prohibitive. So, erring on the side of caution, I think Davy's point is a good point. Because when it's granted for 36 years, it's out with our controls for that period of time, albeit that they adhere to the rules and what have you. But if we wanted to do something, change something, at least we would have that at our elbow, that we could say, well, hang on a minute, that's expired now and you're no longer entitled to do it. And it would give the local authority, who knows, in 10, 15, 20 years' time, say this area wants to be developed for housing or something like that. It just gives a bit more control for a local authority rather than something that length of time. And that's so basically, I'm agreeing with you, David. Yeah, no, you're not the only one. Thanks, Chair.
Chair.
Yes,
can I move an amendment that we grant it for 10 years?
Yeah, certainly.
I'll second it then, Chair.
I'd be quite happy to go ahead with that as well, if everyone else was in agreement.
Agreed.
Chair.
Okay, agreed to change it to 10 years. Okay.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is Bernard in yet, Stuart, or will Tina just carry on?
I don't believe so, Chair. No, I don't think he's arrived yet.
No, that's fine. We'll move on to agenda item 8. That's application P210034, and that's in pages 93 to 104. And we'll ask Tina to take us through the item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application by the council, our colleagues in community resources, for a change of use of the demolished sports centre site to a raised bed growing area. It's the site of the former Burnhill Sports Centre at Tory Glen Road in Rutherglen. The proposal involves the reuse of the site, which has been lying vacant since the demolition. It's understood it would be managed by the council on a similar basis to allotment sites, and council residents would be able to, council area residents would be able to apply to rent the use of the raised beds to grow food in the same way that applications can be made for allotments. In terms of the proposed physical development of the site is a potential ground contamination site, and for that reason, the hard standing would remain, and the growing areas would be designed to sit on top of the existing retained concrete slab, so the ground beneath that wouldn't be disturbed, with a liner and stones used to level the site and provide additional distance from the ground, so that they are, as they say, raised beds. The food growing areas would comprise mainly of raised beds, but there would also be 2 containers within the site to act as storage for equipment and materials. We're also proposing a small seating area and compost bay are proposed together with a portable toilet. In terms of the policy, it's within the urban area, and it's a use that would be acceptable. There's no objections from consultees as set out in section 4 of the report. Environmental services were consulted, and there was a report done in terms of the contamination. Because my understanding is because the ground isn't being disturbed and the beds are raised, then that's acceptable to them, subject to conditions. In terms of representations, there were a number of representations in terms of the fact from local people that live round about. They were critical of the lack of consultation on the use of the site. Having said that, that would have been a matter for the applicants, which in this case is Community Resources. But in terms of the planning application, there was publicity for the application itself. The planning application has been subject to the usual standard of neighbour notification and the advert. Some additional pre-planning consultation would have been encouraged, but in terms of the planning process, it's all been carried out as per the legislation. Having said that, neighbours have asked about detailed issues in terms of how it will look. And would the allotment benefit the people of Burnhill, etc.? As I say, my understanding is that it's a waiting list, and it'll be sites will be allocated in a similar way to the allotments. The other responses and comments are set out in section 5 of the report. So, in principle, with regard to the actual site itself, it would see the redevelopment of the site. It's lain empty for some time. It's fairly much a derelict site, but local groups would be able to access it and food growing. In terms of planning, it's within the built-up area, and the proposal is fine in planning policy. So, recommending approval, Chair, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions or comments for Tina? Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. My throat there. Welcome this, obviously. There are a few points I'd like to make. First of all, I think that in the last couple of years, the number of people wanting and applying to go onto our list for allotments has basically skyrocketed. So this is the right application at the right time in terms of trying to serve the whole of the South Lanarkshire community in terms of allotments. I mean, I accept the history of the site. Many of you, I mean, I'm half Rutherglen myself, and I remember that was the old soda works. So that ground can never be opened up because it's basically sulphur. So I think the fact that they're utilising it as a raised bed allotment is wonderful. Raised bed allotments also bring in the fact that wheelchair allotment users, it's wonderful in that sense that it allows disabled people access to the allotment movement. So I praise that. The one point in terms of, I noticed in Tina's mention about the community is, and I accept that this is not in the gift of planning, but I'd like to make a suggestion that to get more community involvement in the allotment movement and the allotment process, that one, or maybe even two, of the raised beds be offered to the local community. One, I think it would give them an ownership and involvement in it, and two, try and get their sort of permission and acquiescence in terms of it's theirs. It's not just people from the outside areas coming in, that it's theirs and they can use it to develop an interest in green growing for the local community. One other point I'd like to make, again, if Pauline, is given the fact that it's raised beds and you can't open the ground there, I'm assuming that the soil will be brought in. There'll be a contract for the soil. If Pauline can give me some details on that, the process, whether it will go out to tender or whatever for farms to supply the soil, and I suspect there'll be a lot of it for raised beds in terms of this. So absolutely welcome it. I think this is a great move forward in terms of the allotment movement inside South Lanarkshire, and it's certainly its finger on the pulse in terms of the number of people who want involvement in allotments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Pauline Elliott, want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Through you. Councillor Scott's points are well made, and it is separate from planning, but I happen to know that the applicant, who are our colleagues in community services, have been speaking to some of the community and voluntary groups in Rutherglen, of which there are a number, and it is the intention to offer at least one of the raised bed units to a local community group to enable locals to participate. Obviously, very positive health and well-being, it's exercise, it's company, and then also the benefits of homegrown food. And your point about people with disabilities being able to use the raised beds, it's also good for older people, Councillor Scott, because I know that after I've been in the garden for a day, I can't walk for about a week. So I think that raised beds are also good as people that are getting on in years.
Chair, can I stress I was not casting any aspersions on any officer? Please excuse me for that.
No. I was just thinking there's time for a Radox bath springs to mind. Anyway, and your other point about the contract is correct. So, assuming members are happy to grant permission here today, the contract will be let and the contractor will be responsible for all the materials, but the soil will be brought on site because, as you've pointed out, the ground is not the best, it's contaminated, so the contractor will be responsible for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. Councillor Lennon, you want to come in?
Yes, I just want to say, as a local member for the area, and I know the site quite well, I think this is a brilliant proposal. I think it's brilliant to see the site being brought back into use, and particularly a use as like socially positive and like as environmentally positive as some raised bed allotments. Although I've got to say I'm a wee bit concerned based on Councillor Scott's description of the site, because I actually play football on the pitch immediately adjacent to it, and so to find out that it's all sulphur and I shouldn't be kicking up the grass too much for the sake of my health, it's a wee bit worrying. But on a kind of more serious point, most of the objections, as far as I can tell to this, have been about process and about the way in which community and enterprise, the applicant, have engaged with the local community. So I'm encouraged to hear that a bit more effort has been made in terms of reaching out to some of the voluntary groups. But I think that there is previous in this area for community and enterprise kind of trying to steamroller things through, trying to get things passed or trying to submit things to this committee with the absolute minimum of consultation. And I think that has kind of coloured the attitude that a lot of local people specific to Burnhill have towards these kind of proposals. When these were being initially discussed, one of the things that I really noticed was that actually the local people in the area really weren't at cross purposes with the proposals. They really did think that this kind of thing would be a good use, but they were concerned about knock-on impacts with other projects and concerns that were genuinely held, even if they weren't correct in terms of like what the knock-on effects could be. So absolutely, I'm happy to support this proposal. I think it's great, and I think that the kind of goodwill gesture of having one of the beds kind of set aside or used for the participation of local people is really good. But kind of going forward, I think the way that we engage with members of communities like Burnhill, I think it really needs to improve. I think that there is a kind of a culture to some extent in parts of the council where the statutory minimum is done in terms of consultation, and once the boxes are ticked, then it's just a case of kind of getting things through and getting them over the line. I think in some circumstances that's quite damaging in the long run.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands.
Chair, Councillor Thompson's got his hand raised.
Oh, thank you, Stuart. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll make it quickly. Graham has already mentioned it, and I welcome for saying that. It's good to see this facility will be adequate and it'll welcome people recognised with disability, in particular wheelchair users. Having spoke recently with our new MSP, who herself is a disabled person and uses a wheelchair, I'm sure she will as well, and she's an affinity with there. I'll welcome this. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Agree the report.
Great.
Okay, thank you. And understand that Bernard's now in the building. So if we can go back to agenda item 4, and that's application P20-1680, and that's on pages 33 to 44, and I'll hand over to Bernard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for that slight technical issue. Item 4, planning permission is sought for the erection of residential development containing 12 flats, which would all contain 2 bedrooms. The building would be 4 stories in height, and the development would be operated by the West of Scotland Housing Association. There would be off-street parking provided within the development for all properties. The area is predominantly characterised by a mix of land uses, including a church, commercial operations, such as a vehicular repair garage, and residential accommodation. The residential accommodation in the surrounding area includes 2- and 3-storey flatted residential properties, together with a small row of terraced houses on John Street. The building, as proposed, would have a traditional pitched roof, and externally it will be finished in a combination of facing brick, zinc cladding, glazing panels and concrete roof tiles. Vehicular access to the site is proposed from a new access from Haddle Street, and there would also be pedestrian access to the site from Haddle Street and John Street. Amenity space associated with the flats would also be provided on site. In terms of the local plan, the site is designated as suitable for housing, and therefore the principle of a residential development at this location is considered to be an appropriate form of development. No objections have been raised from consultees subject to the use of appropriate conditions, and these comments are summarised in section 4 of the report. One objection has been received which raises concerns about overlooking the height of the building, parking and disruption during construction. In general land use terms and policy terms, the principle of a residential development at this location is acceptable. The proposed development would make use of a brownfield site and contribute to the regeneration of the surrounding area. The design, layout and scale of the development are considered to be acceptable, along with the impact on the surrounding area. A residential development at this location would not alter unacceptably the character and amenity of the area. The proposal represents an appropriate form of development at this location and is considered to be acceptable. It is therefore recommended that the application is granted subject to conditions.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions or comments for Bernard?
Chair, Councillor Nealon's got her hand raised.
Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Nealon.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say in the old worn-out phrase, I welcome this report and finally the development of this site, and particularly with the fact that it's affordable housing that's going to go up, which is much needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other hands, Stuart?
No, no other hands, Stuart.
Okay, thank you. I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agree the report.
Great.
Okay, thank you. On to agenda item 7. That's P21-0540, and that's on pages 81 to 92, and there's another one for Bernard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission is sought part retrospectively for the installation of vehicular access gates and associated works at Uddingston Cricket and Sports Club. The access and gates would only be for use by emergency vehicles. The gates are located on Castle Gate, Uddingston, within the general urban area. In order to form the access and install the gates, part of a hedge was removed. The gates are approximately 4 metres wide by 2.5 metres high, constructed with green weld mesh panelling. The applicant has stated that the proposed use of the gate is for an emergency entrance and exit, identified as being a key outcome of a recent health and safety audit carried out at the club. It is not planned to be utilised as a general entrance and will be locked at all times with a keyed padlock to prevent unauthorised use. The proposal raises no policy issues, and there was no objection from the Council's road service, who who are the only consultee. 10 objections to the proposal have been received, and issues raised include concerns about the retrospective aspect of the development and the failure to undertake appropriate neighbour notification and consultation. Other issues raised are summarised in section 5 of the report and include ownership issues, road safety and use of the access. Whilst the concerns raised by objectors are noted, neighbour notification was undertaken as part of the planning application once submitted. The access and gates on Castlegate do not raise any policy issues, and there is no objection on road safety from the Council's road service. The design and general appearance of the gates is considered to be acceptable at this location and does not detract unacceptably from the amenity of the surrounding area. A condition is proposed which would restrict use of the gates solely for emergency vehicles. Overall, it is considered that the application complies with the relevant local plan policies and is acceptable. It's therefore recommended that the application is granted subject to conditions.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions or comments for Bernard?
Chair, Councillor Shearer's got his hand raised.
Oh, thank you, Stuart. Councillor Shearer?
Thank you, Chair. So on a more general point that Bernard brought up there, retrospective planning applications. Can I ask either Bernard or Pauline whether we have introduced the additional charge for retrospective planning applications, or are we still in the process of doing that? Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't hear what you said there. You think you were muted?
Can I come in, Chair?
I was right, yeah, I was right, Pauline, then, sorry. I thought you'd frozen actually.
It was just to say, to answer Councillor Shearer's point, that the government's consultation on planning fees generally, which actually took place in January 2020, has been put on hold due to the COVID pandemic. But we have heard recently that they are looking to pick that up in the near future. So to answer your question, Councillor Shearer, no, not yet. We can't increase fees for anything. And as you know, there was a proposal to double the fee for retrospective. It's not legislation yet, but it looks like it might be probably for the earliest for the next financial year for some from March 2022. But as soon as we know, we'll let you know. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a slightly broader point in relation to the application here. I mean, a lot of us know that Uddingston Cricket Club has been an established sports venue in Scotland for quite a years. Scottish cricket team hold internationals here. I mean, I even remember years ago going over to watch a Scotland 11 against the Australian touring team over there. So it's been an established venue, taking money off people going in over the years. Surely, I mean, they wouldn't have been holding all these events with paying customers unless there had been access for emergency vehicles into the ground. Has there been any change that, in terms of legislation that necessitates an exclusive entrance for emergency vehicles? And of course, the principle, if we give consent to this, there's obviously the principle will be given for Uddingston Cricket Club to have a second access into their ground. Even though I accept the point that they'll padlock it and it'll only be for emergency vehicles. But has there been a change in legislation that necessitates them to have an exclusive entrance for emergency vehicles? If Bernard can answer that, I'd be greatly obliged. Thank you, Chair.
Do you, Chair? Councillor Scott, I'm not aware of any specific legislation that has changed in terms of planning. Certainly, there may be something that relates to the operation of the sports grounds, etc. I think the main issue that has changed, I don't know when the last time you maybe were at the ground, they've made some changes, not where the cricket pitch is, but there's an all-weather hockey surface, which has made some changes to how it's operated. So I think it's just to basically allow, if there was anything going on the main entrance, this is a secondary access, and it would allow them to get into the other parts of the sports pitches. So it's not, in terms of the use, if this was going to be, for instance, a secondary access that was going to be used all the time, it would be looking at a different design to what has been proposed. And I'm quite sure that from a roads perspective, it would be looking at a different design altogether if this was just going to be a standard in-out access for lots of different vehicles for if there were any other changes on site. But the way it's proposed is solely as an emergency vehicle access, should it be required.
Thank you, Bernard. Okay, Councillor Scott. Your hand's still up, Councillor Scott. Thank you. Councillor Alison?
Yeah, I think it's maybe been answered after Graham's question, but can I just confirm that you're saying that the gates will remain locked at all time? Because my question was really around how you're going to manage that, bearing in mind as well the email we received, I think, in the last week, saying that you're not going to be able to fully implement enforcement action due to staff shortages at this time. Just wanting to make sure that we can implement the conditions that we're putting on this application.
Yes, through you, Chair. The condition is attached, and it would be a keyed padlock, prevent anybody just going up and taking access for it. Obviously, in terms of planning, enforcement quite often is reactionary and it's a result of complaints. But as I understand it, the access hasn't been used yet, although the gates have been formed. There are still other aspects of it that would need to be formed to complete it. So it's only part retrospective, i.e. the gates are up, but there would be some work to the pavement area to create the access there, which is still to be undertaken. But yes, we would be able to take action if something was brought to our attention that they weren't complying with the condition.
Thank you, Bernard. Councillor Convery?
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I'd just like to ask Bernard, I mean, is there not a contradiction here, Bernard? First of all, it said that the club had identified that they needed another exit and egress. Surely it's the fire brigade and the emergency services identify these things. No amateurs, because that's what they are basically. They're cricket fans. They're no health and safety people. And secondly, if it's an entrance for an emergency, yet we're going to have it padlocked, again, that's a total contradiction, surely. I just don't see why planning officers have agreed to something that basically it doesn't make sense, because it's not an emergency entrance if there's a padlock on it. So what was the reason for granting planning permission in the first place? And Graham made the point, for the last 18 months, everything Britain's been locked down. So all of a sudden, at the time when the place is getting used the least amount of time, all of a sudden they need another planning. It just doesn't square with me why we would give planning permission for this at this stage in time. Thanks, Chair.
Bernard, do you want to come in there?
Yes, through you, Chair. Just in terms of the questions there, the club themselves, they would be responsible for undertaking their own health and safety audit, and I would fully anticipate and expect that they would involve the relevant parties, whether that be the fire brigade, police, etc., to ensure that what they are providing, it might also be something that is part of their insurance liability just for the operation of the matches, etc., on the site and training. In terms of the access, it's an arrangement that the keyed padlock, that can be operated by emergency services if required to get onto the site, so that they would be able to get in and there wouldn't be a problem with accessing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devlin?
Thanks, Chair. I really am like previously stated, I'm a bit confused about this. They already have an entrance, and I do know the pitch, Bernard, I do know the area. Now, the gates taking you into the rugby field, you've got the whole of the rugby pitch, the emergency vehicles can't go on top of, whereas if you go in the original space that's here just now, the established one, that you can get right in, and you can get right into the hockey pitch. So I'm a bit confused about all of this. Why? And they have had major venues down there, even to the extent 18 months ago, there was a music festival with thousands of folk in it, and we didn't need the emergency vehicle. I just don't understand it. I think it's okay. My opinion, it's maybe a ploy for something else, but I don't see the need for a separate entrance.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair, if you don't mind, could I come back?
Yes, you certainly can.
That's Bernard the question. Bernard thinks that he would have contacted fire and rescue and the police. My question is, did they? Have we got it in writing that the police are happy, that the fire services and the emergency services are happy? And if they're no, and have not been contacted, we should be throwing this out, because it's just all hearsay. Well, we think they might have done that. We think this. It's not about thinking. It's about getting actual facts. So unless we can be, this committee can be shown the evidence to say that another emergency exit is required, I don't think we should be approving this today, Chair. It just opens up a can of worms that at times I just don't think should be allowed to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Pauline, you want to come in there?
Thanks, Chair. I think I would like to hear from our roads officers, because really a lot of this stuff is more in their expertise. But so maybe if Fraser could come in and clarify some stuff for members. Just with regarding any other reason for the gates, you will notice from your conditions on page 90 that there is a condition of the permission and the use of the access gates are only for emergency vehicles and for no other type of activity. So that particular concern is covered by condition, Chair. But if Fraser could maybe come in and contact, and comment, I think that might be helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. Fraser?
Sorry, Pauline, I'm not aware of any kind of discussions with emergency access arrangements. Looking at it, it just looks a closer location to the rugby pitch, but I'm afraid I don't have any facts on that either.
Okay, thank you, Fraser.
Chair, see, based on that information for the roads officer, who, as Pauline's quite rightly said, has got more of an input to this than anybody else, I would move that we defer this and just don't allow it to go ahead until we get proper information back as to why they need another access. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'll bring Bernard in and then Councillor Scott after Bernard.
Yes, just to clarify, we didn't consult the emergency services as part of this planning application in terms of consulting the fire brigade, etc. That would have been something that the club would presumably have done to inform their decision to form this access. But I know Councillor Convery's point that he's made.
Thank you. Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair. In the light of obviously my colleague Councillor Convery can read my mind, because obviously I was wanting to come in and I will formally move a deferral on the grounds that we contact the emergency services. I mean, they're being used as a pretext for a new entrance, and we don't know what their views on this are. I find that slightly odd. That yes, if we are going to establish the principle of a new entrance, it should be legitimate for the reasons that the Uddingston Cricket Club are suggesting, that the emergency services want it, need it, require it. So hopefully I'll find a seconder for it, but I'll move a deferral on these grounds. Chair,
and I'll second it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm quite happy to go along with deferral unless anyone's otherwise minded.
I don't believe
it. Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, so we'll agree to defer.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 9, and that's application P201847, and that's on pages 105 to 128. And Tony will take us through the item. Thank you, Tony.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the plan application site forms part of a larger landholding in the applicant's ownership, extends to approximately 193 hectares. It's known as Kerswell Mains Farm, and it's situated approximately 1.5 kilometres to the north of Canworth. Planning permission in principle was granted in March 2011 for a major leisure development on this wider area that comprised a hotel and associated leisure facilities such as a pool, a spa, a golf course and a chalet development. And the master plan that was approved under that consent includes the erection of around 300 chalets within this current application site. And further applications have been granted in the meantime, which have had the effect of extending the planning permission in principle, which means the principle of the resort development remains extant. The application before you today, it relates to an area of land extending to approximately 42 hectares, so around 21% of the total land holding that the applicants have. It currently comprises a mixture of established woodland and agricultural grazing. The A70 bounds the site to the north, and to the south and west there's further agricultural land, and the settlement of Kerswell is located to the east. So permission in principle is sought for the erection of a residential retirement development aimed at over 55-year-olds. The development would comprise a mixture of approximately 300 dwellings and also a 60-bed care home. There would also be an on-site commercial centre. New vehicle access is proposed off the A70. The site includes 2 extensive clearings within the woodland, and the indicative site plan shows that these roundels would be the main areas for development to minimise tree removal. And as I said before, the previous consent included the provision of around 300 shallows in these particular areas. The applicants have submitted a statement in support of the application. That's described in section 2 of the report. Essentially, they're talking about bringing together the connecting threads of well-being, sustainability, community and nature. And they're also advising or stating that the proposal addresses the growth in the older population, with people living longer, having healthier lives, and that reflects the move towards inclusive, multi-generational developments. So turning to the consultation responses, Roads have confirmed that the access to the development of a newly formed Ghost Island off the A70 is acceptable, and information is being provided to demonstrate that the design of the Ghost Island junction meets design standards, and also appropriate visibility has been identified on the submitted plans. A transport assessment submitted with the application includes an assessment of trips and the junction modelling, and that shows that the proposed site access and all the nearby junctions would operate within capacity. In terms of active travel provision, the applicants undertaken discussions with neighbouring landowners and has agreement in principle to create a cycleway and footway that would run largely parallel with the A70. Hourly bus service in Canworth linked to Lanark Bus Station and Carstairs Railway Station. And the provision of the dedicated cycle footway would make use of these services more likely. The applicant has also submitted a bus service strategy which details the applicant's proposals to provide a shuttle bus to both the Wellbeing Resort and also the retirement village. The planning application, which is proposed as part of this recommendation, would include requirements in relation to the provision of the new cycle footway and also the bus service. Scottish Forestry noted in their response that the proposed compensatory planting didn't entirely cover the amount of tree cover that would be removed. So following discussions with the applicant, that's been extended. The compensatory planting now extends to 1.5 hectares of canopy cover. And that also would be secured through the legal agreement. Discussions taken place with housing services about affordable housing provision. Now, they've advised, due to the bespoke nature of the tenure, they don't consider it would be compatible with on-site provision of affordable housing. So therefore, they request that a commuted sum is provided to fund affordable housing within the Clydesdale housing market area. The applicants are agreeable to that, and the affordable housing contribution again forms part of the recommended legal agreement. So following neighbour notification and advertisement of the application in the press, we received 38 letters of objection. The points raised are summarised in section 5 of the report. Again, I'll describe some of those points and respond to them in turn. Firstly, the impact on local infrastructure. There's reference to schools, medical facilities, and the public water network. Now, given the over 55s demographic proposed, it's unlikely that the school age dependence would be prevalent within development. The proposed development itself includes medical care for the residents, but even then it's not considered a development would be of a scale that would impact medical provision within the area. And Scottish Water are also content that there's adequate water capacity within the area. Second reason for objection, it relates to the increase in traffic and an impact on road and pedestrian safety. Roads have no objections to the proposals in terms of the impact on the wider road network and also the new access into the development. A new cycleway and footpath would link to Canwath, and the applicants are also proposing a shuttle bus, as I mentioned, which would reduce car travel. So the service would also provide public transport for staff and visitors within the leisure resort, as well as this current proposal. So, and this will be secured through a planning obligation. A third ground of objection relates to the impact on amenity due to the scale of proposals and also loss of privacy and increased noise. These concerns appear to relate to the wider proposals that include the leisure resort, which are not under consideration today. The application site itself, it's a significant distance from the closest properties, so the impact on residential amenity will be minimal. And finally, concerns raised about the impact on protected species and wildlife, loss of trees, and also a lack of biodiversity. Now, protected species surveys and habitat surveys being carried out, and they showed there be no adverse impact on these designations. Nature Scott have also not objected to the application. And as I mentioned, 1.5 hectares of compensatory canopy cover is now proposed within the proposal as well. And biodiversity itself forms a matter specified by condition that we would address in a more detailed stage to ensure there was increased biodiversity. So an assessment of the application is set out in section 6 of the report. It concludes the proposals are contrary to policy on development in the rural area, as the creation of the retirement village involves permanent residential development. But the report then goes on to assess whether a departure is justified. So firstly, we're saying that at a national level, Scottish planning policy introduces a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and it states that the planning system should support economically, environmentally and socially sustainable places by enabling development that balances the costs and benefits of a proposal over the long term. So giving weight to the net economic benefit and also improving the well-being by offering opportunities for social interaction and physical activity. We think those two principles support the proposal in principle. So in general terms, the principal development on the wider site has been established by the previous consents. The former development approved relates to leisure, which is the appropriate use in the countryside, including the lodges that would have been proposed or created within the current application site. That itself would have an impact on the amenity and the character of the area, and also the local road network in terms of traffic generation. Detailed considerations being given to the arguments submitted by the applicant described in section 2 of the report, and we think that the creation of a well-being community is a modern concept. It's not been fully introduced into Scotland before, but it is. There's evidence that this type of model is being delivered in other parts of the world, and these threads are also emerging through new and emerging planning policy at a national level. I think it's fair to say that a standalone development involving the creation of a retirement village would not be appropriate. However, the links with a wider leisure resort are strong, and the presence of a permanent community would enhance the overall development. It's considered the development being focused on well-being is intrinsically wedded to that ideal. So there's also economic benefits that the applicants have highlighted. The construction of the proposals would themselves result in around 1,400 full-time jobs over 7 years, which would bring around £8 million into the local economy. And that's greater than would be involved in the construction of the lodges. And the leisure resort itself, together with the wellbeing community, would long-term provide 930 full-time jobs with an annual economic impact of around £26 million. So the impact on the local economy is significant, especially in terms of its recovery from the pandemic. The replacement of the holiday lodges, which have been granted previously with a well-designed low-carbon community, is considered to represent a net environmental gain overall. And the design principles that are being proposed are in principle supportive of the proposals. So we therefore considered that on balance, the principle of the proposals can be supported. To ensure the site's not subsequently developed for mainstream housing, or to ensure that the dwellings are occupied as envisaged, i.e. by over 55s. It's intended that the occupancy of the dwellings is restricted by age, and that would be achieved through the planning obligation. It's also essential that the phasing of the retirement village in relation to the leisure development is managed to ensure both elements are delivered in tandem. And again, the planning obligation would include that, the phasing element as part of that. So all of the material matters are assessed in detail in the report, and they don't overcome the conclusion that the proposals represent an appropriate form of development at this location. So taking account of the economic development of proposals, the high quality developments proposed and the low carbon design principles, we're satisfied that in this case, an exception to policy can be justified. But that's subject to the conclusion of the legal agreement that I've mentioned as I've gone through the presentation. So it's therefore recommended that a departure from the development plan is acceptable for the reasons set out in section 6.26 of the report, and the permission is granted. That would be subject to the conclusion of a planning obligation to address the matters described on the front page of the report.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions or comments? Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair, Tony. This area, as you've said, has had a planning permission for development, I think, since the late 1980s. And I do generally believe that what's being proposed will be beneficial in general to the area. But I think we also need to take recognisance of some of the issues and concerns, particularly the residents of Kerswell, a village that we have created in the last 15 years. And planning conditions have been put in place to protect them that have not worked and are leading to significant issues. So in accepting this, I think we need to make sure, absolutely certain, that we are not causing more problems. For instance, the eastern boundary of this site is the road that is currently there, that residences have an access right over. Part of this or not is the road that is being suggested as an access to this development. Is it that road, or is there a different area that is not marked? Can we ensure that vehicles will not use the southern road from Commend as an access through the village of Kerswell, either in the construction phase or later on? I wouldn't like to see a development that could add greatly to the local community, actually causing more problems, as the conditions we've put on previous applications have not been sufficient to protect the local community.
Yeah. Through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Allison. Yes, the access to the proposed retirement village and the leisure development as well would be from the A70, so new access points would be created along that junction, along that frontage. There's no intention at all of vehicular access being taken through Commend or Kerswell. I know the road through Kerswell kind of terminates at the boundary of this application site, but it's not intended that vehicular access would then take on further into the development. There will be opportunities, obviously, for cycle and footpath for walkers to use that road to access the wider area. But in terms of vehicle traffic, no, that's not intended.
Yeah, that's not quite correct. That is a through road. I agreed the north part from Kerswell to the North Lodge is not in a good state of repair currently, but it is currently a through road, and many of the residents have a right vehicle access over that road. Now, how are we going to prevent it being used as a through road? And I actually think that we should be making use of this road as well, Tony. Or is it simply being left the way it is?
Well, the through road through Carswell wouldn't be a need for the applicants in this case to upgrade that particular road because it's not intended to use it. As I say, the new accesses are off the A70. I mean, I'm just thinking aloud here. I could amend the condition or other condition that specifies that vehicle access will not be taken through Carswell. It'll only be through the A70 and nowhere else, if that would help. Yeah, happy for me to add that.
Yes, I would certainly be happy for that to be added.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Lockhart.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Further to what Alex has been saying, I mean, I guess one has to welcome that because obviously Commonwealth itself could do with the increase in its overall size, and no doubt the people in Commonwealth will be delighted to have a wider audience, if you like, for the shopping and all the rest of it. But a couple of areas worry me. One is to continue Alex's point. I seem to remember that there was a problem with building some additional houses on that road because the road itself was considered to be too narrow. And Tony, I'm not sure, is that an adopted road, first of all, or is it not? And then, which leads on to saying perhaps that should be made an adopted road and widened if we're going to do this, either at the council's or at the developer's expense.
Yeah.
And the second point was, I think that knowing where it is, and it is on the road, obviously, the line Wang to Edinburgh, I think it's going to be important that bus services are looked at to make sure that the people resident there have a chance to be not to be isolated, if you like, by buses going past the door rather than actually a regular service. And by that, I mean the bus going into the village rather than just stopping at the entrance. And the third area does worry me a bit. I know they've got, theoretically, got medical facilities, but the problem in that area is quite a few of these practices, these surgeries, are already under pressure, and there are a lot of complaints emanating about the inability to see doctors and so on and so forth. I wouldn't like to see a large village of people who are more likely, and I know that from my own age group, to be approaching the doctor more regularly and finding that there are not enough of them there. So there's a few concerns, although obviously overall I do welcome it.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, I'll answer those points in turn. I think the housing developments that you're talking about in Carswell, they've taken access along Carswell Avenue, which is a private road, and there's no intention for that to be upgraded to an adoptable standard. But vehicular traffic to this retirement village or the leisure resort won't be through that, along that road. They'll be from the A70. So I think that hopefully answers that particular point. In terms of the bus service, yes, the applicant's proposing a shuttle bus, which would serve both the residents within this retirement village, but also staff and visitors to the leisure resort when it's built. Roads, a bus strategy has been proposed and submitted, by the applicants. Roads have reviewed that and they're happy with the outcome of that. And we will be ensuring this is provided through the legal obligation that we're going to enter into with the applicants to address all those issues, and the detail will be found in that as we go into those discussions. In terms of the impact on medical facilities, as I said in my presentation, there will be medical facilities within the retirement village, which you would expect that's where the residents would go to for medical care. At the moment, impact on medical facilities isn't a planning matter that we can take into account. I think I've said at the previous committee, though, that is changing as through the new Planning Act and as legislation is enacted. that will then become an issue when we determine applications and when we allocate sites.
Okay, right. Well, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Councillor McCallum.
Councillor McCallum.
Chair, thank you. You're probably aware of the correspondence received from a nearby resident of this area who has grave concerns about the scale of the application. And he's seeking or suggesting that there's a committee site visit. Do you have any comment on that at all?
I would be quite happy to have a site visit, but I'm not sure if we're able to now, because I think it should have been lodged earlier. The application?
Yes, Chair. The guidelines on site visits do require the request to be made in writing 2 days before committee, and that would have been the normal way of dealing with that.
Thanks, Tony. Don't know if anyone's got any comments on that. We're quite happy to proceed.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agree with the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 10, and that's application P21-0555, and that's on pages 129 to 140, and Tina will take us through the item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. It's a detailed planning application by Taylor Wimpey at Newton Farm, which is part of Newton CGA. The site currently extends an existing area of open space within the community growth area and sits behind Mitchell Avenue, Westburn, which is to the south. The applicants, Taylor Wimpey, are proposing to regrade and remodel the landscaping of this existing open space area within the CGA. They're using topsoil and from 2 of the housing sites that they're developing within Newton. And the works would include, excuse me, the regrading and raising the profile of the site slightly, and the replanting of the site. In paragraph 2.1, we describe some of the planting, but there'll be a mixture of native trees such as alder, birch and hazel, together with plants such as hawthorn, aspen and blackthorn. In terms of local plan, it's within the built-up area. It's within the Newton CGA. It's identified as open space within the CGA, and it would remain as such. Some of the trees that are there on the site will remain. And as I say, most of the site would be remodelled and replanted. In terms of the consultees, there are no objections from Countryside and Green Space or Environmental Services. However, we do have an objection from Halfway Community Council, and they are saying on the basis that the proposal involves substantial amounts of soil to the proposed site, and it's not part of the master plan. In terms of it not being part of the master plan, the proposal to reprofile the site is not, but the open space is there at the moment, and as I say, will remain there. In terms of the ecology, the issues are raised there. We did get a report from an ecologist, and the conclusion there that there are no issues for the application site of any concern. They also comment that it would increase the quality of the open space with new native species and while protecting the flora and fauna there. In terms of representations, there has been a large number of representations when the application was first received, 52 letters of representation. There are 3 letters of support and 2 letters of comment as well, and the points of concern are set out in the report. The local residents are really just saying that it should remain untouched, and there is a wildlife habitat there at the moment. As I say, we do have the ecology report. The land itself, although it is identified as open space and can be used as such, it is on a slope and there is some woodland at the top, but it's not something that's commonly used. You can cut across it, but it is quite rough terrain as it is at the moment. So It's not a well-used recreational area as far as we're aware. As I say, it's on a slope. It would still be on a slope, but slightly higher ground level. But the additional planting would be of benefit. It would regrade it, and it would be an improvement in terms of the native species. Clearly, the developer is saving by not having to run trucks off the site to take material off the housing site. And we've had discussions about whether the proposal is attractive, it's acceptable in planning terms. There's also the issue about climate change, and if we can keep the reuse of the soil from elsewhere within the community growth area is to be encouraged as well, just so that there's less trips off. But what we've looked at, or what we've concentrated on, is the end profile and the end use of the site, and we're happy that it is acceptable, and in fact will be an improvement to that area. Therefore, recommending approval, Chair, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions or comments for Tina? So it's in hands. I'll move the report.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Thompson's got his hand raised.
Sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Councillor Thompson, your microphone's on mute.
Sorry, Chair. Just saying there, referring to Tina, what she says about the natural habitat. What are we doing specifically, or can we do anything to protect wildlife? Because I see it in a lot of new developments. Not that I'm in one myself, but my friends are, and it's unbelievable the amount of natural habitat being disturbed and displacement of animals. Can we do anything specifically, or any guarantees undertaken to protect them? Thanks,
yourself, Chair. We can do, but what's shown up in the ecology report here is that there isn't any protected species on the site. There is a watercourse relatively near, but it's out with the site, and it hasn't picked up anything, any of the protected species that we would normally report. If there were protected species on the site, like badgers or otters or whatever, then we would they would have to seek a licence in terms of the protection. That's not to dismiss the normal, more routine, if you like, flora and fauna, but there's nothing been identified specifically. But as I say, I think the proposal for the replanting will be a better habitat for the flora and fauna. So we're satisfied that we don't need anything specific here.
Okay, thanks for that answer. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tina. No more hands, Stuart?
No other hands, Chair, no.
Okay, thank you. I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Okay, agree with the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 11, and that's plan application HM 150466, and that's on pages 141 to 144, and Bernard will take us through that item. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. The committee will recall that a report was previously considered in September last year concerning this development. In summary, a planning application was reported to the Planning Committee in 2017 regarding residential development proposals at Greyfriars, which is a B-listed building, and the recommendation to approve the application was agreed, subject to the conclusion of a legal agreement concerning a financial contribution in respect of education, housing and community. Due to the condition of the listed building and the requirement for it to form part of the development, it was not considered appropriate following a detailed and independent assessment of the proposals to seek any contribution. The matter was reported to committee last year, and following discussion, rather than approve the original recommendation not to seek any contribution, it was proposed that a clawback formula be inserted into the planning obligation, which would base any potential payment on the level of future profit generated from the development. Following the decision of the committee, discussions were undertaken with the applicant in order to try and reach agreement and conclude the legal agreement. However, agreement could not be reached. Instead, the applicant has reconsidered and revised their position and are proposing to make a payment of £5,000 per unit. Taking into consideration the various aspects of the proposals, including the listed building and the positive negotiations that have been undertaken following consideration of this matter by the Planning Committee last year, it's considered that the payment of £5,000 per unit is reasonable in this instance. It's therefore recommended that this offer is accepted and the obligation concluded on this basis, thereby allowing the planning application to be determined in due course. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions or comments for Bernard?
Yes, Chair, I've got my hand up, Maureen.
I think Councillor Shearer had his hand up first.
Councillor Devlin, a local member, I'll wait until she makes her comments. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, very considerate of you. Councillor Devlin?
Thanks, Debbie. It just shows you with this one that if you dig your heels in, which you did, and all of you did, that you can achieve it. It was actually quite disappointing that I know they had an independent consultancy firm. The fact that planners felt it was reasonable for them not to contribute. Can I just confirm that there's 5,000 per unit for the 39 units, Bernard?
Yes, it would be for all the units within the development.
Right, that's fine. So that means it's almost, well, it's 195k that's coming to the local community that wouldn't have came unless we dug our heels in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shearer?
Thank you, Chair. Given that it was myself that proposed the clawback arrangements and the committee felt necessary to go with that, it's now, to take up Maureen's point, it now seems that the easier option for the developer is to accept the £5,000 that we were asking for originally rather than share the profits. So their argument to committee then was there wouldn't be any profits and it wasn't going to be financially viable to go ahead with this development. Now it seems that it's easier just to pay the contribution to the council. Fine, but you know, it makes me smile that we're not getting a share of the profits, but we'll just pay a set fee. But I do welcome the benefit that that will bring to the local community. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Chair, Councillor Scott's got his hand raised.
Thank you. Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just speak in support of my colleague, Councillor Devlin, and Councillor Shearer as well, and credit both their contributions to getting this application to where it is just now, where there's £5,000 multiplied by 39. I must admit, my eyes lit up when I saw £5,000 per unit, given some of the discussions at this committee in the past. And hopefully that's a shape of things to come in terms of community benefit that we go along in the future. But the point I want to make about this individual application is, do we have a breakdown of the 5,000 multiplied by 39 as to where the community benefit is going here? Or is that possible at this moment? Obviously, I'll leave it in the hands of Bernard or Pauline to answer that one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Pauline or Bernard?
Through you, Chair. Councillor Scott, in terms of the breakdown, that will be finalised as part of the legal agreement, but we would probably be looking at roughly about 40% education, 40% housing, and the remaining 20% from the community.
Is that okay? I think it's been very successful.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no complaints. No.
Thank you very much, and thank you all very much for that one. So I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Great.
Thank you. Agenda item 12.
Sorry, Chair, could I just interrupt a wee second? Understand that Tina Meikle has now left the meeting due to a technical issue. Could I suggest...
I'm here, Chair.
Oh, right, okay. I was just going to suggest a short break, but...
Oh, sorry, I messaged you to say I was out and then I was back in again. Sorry, I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it's agenda item 12, and that's application P21 0786, and that's on pages 143 to 154. Hand over to Tina. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A change of use from Class 1 retail, it's actually a hairdressing, or previously was a hairdressing salon, to Class 2, which is proposed estate agent at 290 Stonelaw Road, which is in the Burnside village centre. And the application site relates to a retail shop. As I say, it has been vacant for some months. And it's currently, its last use was as a hairdresser's. It's located within the neighbourhood centre and which comprises a mixture of businesses, including a large number of shops, several Class 2 units, including a dentist, betting shop and other estate agents, together with hot food restaurant, takeaways, and restaurant and cafe uses. In terms of the local plan policy, both the previous use and the proposed use would comply with policy within the neighbourhood centre. In terms of representations, there have been 21 letters of representation of objection to the proposal, and these are summarised in section 5 of the report. The main issue of concern relates to the existing number of estate agents in Burnside, which members may remember come up for a previous application for a pet shop to be changed to an estate agent. While it's noted that there are already a number of estate agents in the area, I mean, it's a high number, it's 6 for a local neighbourhood centre. This represents only about 15% of the total number of units, and excuse me, there are a healthy number of shops within the area. Given the recent COVID-19 impact on the ability of shops to trade, we do feel that there is increased weight should be given to the economic benefit of any new business. And although it is another estate agent, from a planning point of view, we would encourage the reuse of the vacant unit and any additional employment that brings. Well, it's acknowledged that a hairdresser did provide a service. As I say, it's no longer there, and the unit is vacant. The previous change of use application I mentioned for the pet shop, there was a loyalty felt towards the pet shop, but the pet shop has now relocated across the other side of the road to a smaller unit, so that property is vacant now as well. There was an appeal regarding that refusal of the application, and the reporter intimated that in his decision letter back in June that he was satisfied that allowing the change of use there at that local centre would still maintain a mix of appropriate uses. So the appeal was upheld by the reporter, although, as I say, that unit remains vacant at the moment. It's considered that a change of use would not result, in a substantial change to the character or the viability of the neighbourhood centre. As I said at the previous application, if you could choose the operators, you may think that that you've already got a number of estate agents, but from a planning point of view, we're just asked to consider the proposal in front of us, which is the vacant unit to a Class 2. So therefore, in terms of the economic balance, there are only a couple of vacancies there at the moment, the two that I've mentioned, as far as I'm aware, at the last count, and we're therefore recommending approval of this one, Chair, subject to conditions attached.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions or comments for Tina?
Chair, Councillor Nugent's had her hand raised. I don't know if she's taking it back down again. Yep, I think she wants to speak.
Sorry, Stuart, a few technical issues.
Go ahead, Councillor Nugent.
Thanks, Chair. My feelings really haven't changed on this. As Tina said, we had a similar application at committee in January. The committee made the decision to refuse the application at that point. and I was disappointed that the reporter overturned the decision and granted the change of use. I appreciate that, you know, I don't want to repeat myself from the comments that I've made in January. We know that things are changing, but I think from my point of view, I strongly feel that we should be encouraging as much diversity in our town centres and high streets as we can. So for that reason, I don't support the application, and I would like my comments to be noted, please. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Newton. Any other questions or comments? No other hands, Stuart?
No other hands raised, Chair.
Thank you. I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. And moving on to agenda item 13, and that's application P210802, and that's on pages 155 to 162, and that's another one for Tina. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application for the demolition of a coal bunker and the erection of a pergola at 42 Dryborough Avenue. Probably worth saying at the outset that the applicant is Councillor Alistair Fulton, and that's why it's a committee item. In fact, it may have not, given the small scale nature of the development, it may not normally, it would not have required planning consent if it had been a garden of a house, but the property is a flat, as the block there is subdivided. So in the first instance, it was caught by the planning legislation. It needs planning consent, and as I say, it's required to come to committee because it's a member that's applying. In terms of the actual application itself, it's very straightforward. It's the demolition and the removal of the existing redundant coal bunker located within the rear corner of the garden and the erection of the new freestanding pergola in the garden. From the scale of the proposal, we didn't require to carry out any formal consultations, and we don't have any representations. Therefore, recommending approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions or comments for Tina?
Agreed.
Okay, I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
You agree with the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. I don't have any other items of urgent business, so I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance today, and I'll ask Stuart to stop the recording. Thank you.